Okay. I'd like to thank everyone for having me here tonight. As was introduced, everyone else got out to go out and vote about, what was that, a week ago? And I got to stay home and pull in a favor from a friend, a business partner who has a 6,000 square foot digital billboard in Times Square. And I convinced him to, for an hour, put up a billboard that said, "New Yorkers have the right to self-defense too," with a little URL for where people can go and get my book. But that's as close as I can get to having my voice heard, which is actually not too terrible. I'd like to start off with, I only have 25 minutes because of the length of the show, but I'll be able to answer a lot of questions, and there will be a lot of questions, I'm sure, after this first 25 minutes. But there are typically a lot of questions like, well, how did you get pulled over? And that's kind of where it all begins. I had been living in Colorado and was raising a young family, had just bought a house outside of Boulder, and was living pretty much the American dream. At 24 years old, I was able to work really hard, save up money, buy my first house. My son was born with a view of the Flatirons at Boulder Community Hospital, and things were pretty much amazing. And one day I found out some things that changed my entire life, and I was never able to really reconcile that knowledge with my wife. And in her own words, she was never able to forgive me for not being able to forgive her. And we wound up getting a divorce, and when we were separated, she moved back to live with my parents in New Jersey with my infant son. And I decided, well, clearly I have to sell the house, quit my job, find a new job in New York and New Jersey, and move back to the East Coast so I can be closer to my son. And so I did just that. And about 3 days before I was arrested, I'd called the New Jersey State Police and asked them, "I'm about to move with my firearms. What do I have to do? What's the legal way to do this? I've been living in Colorado. I got them in Colorado. I don't want to get in any trouble." And the detective from the Belmar Barracks of the New Jersey State Police told me, "Well, there's a number of things that you can do. You can register your firearms, but you're not legally required to. We'd really like you to, but you don't have to. And when you're moving from one house to another, you just need to make sure that they're locked in the trunk of the car and unloaded separate from the ammunition." And he told me I could go on the New Jersey State Police website and see the laws for myself. And I did, and I printed off a copy, and I had them with me. And in fact, just to fly from Colorado to New Jersey, I had to have all of my firearms cleared by TSA. So I was able to get the ATF and the FBI and the CBI background checks, passed all of them. I was able to fly from Colorado to New Jersey, clearing my firearms with the TSA, who, in my experience, not the biggest fans of freedom, but even they cleared me for travel with firearms. And I got to New Jersey and put the firearms along with pretty much all of my other possessions in my parents' house while I finalized a deal on moving back into an apartment that I was sharing in Hoboken. And my lease on that apartment began on January 1st, so that was a Thursday. I took my first carload of my possessions up to my apartment on Thursday, and Friday, January 2nd of 2009, I drove back down for the second and final carload to get the last of my possessions and move back into Hoboken. On my drive down, I got a text message from my ex-wife, and she was letting me know that for the fourth week in a row, she wasn't going to let me see my son, and that she talked with her lawyer, and her lawyer said that it was okay and not to bother her. And I said, it's not okay. It's been 4 weeks. I moved 3,500 miles to be closer to him. I don't understand what I'm doing here if I can't see him. In the previous week for Christmas, my mom and I had spent hours waiting for my ex-wife to show up, and she never showed up. And we called the hospitals, and we called the police, and we weren't sure if there was a car accident because the weather was questionable. We called her. We texted her. We heard nothing until sometime around midnight. And that's when we finally knew that she just wasn't bringing my son. And eventually I took her to court. Didn't have any money left because I'd spent $30,000 on my custody battle. And so I was representing myself. And the judge decided, and this was right before I was arrested, that she had been violating my parenting rights. And he ordered her to give me compensatory time to make up for all of the time that she'd stolen between me and my son. And that was a huge victory for me. And on January 2nd, I got that text message, and I got to my parents' house, and I asked my mom, I know I spent all of my money, most of my money's tied up in this house, and I know that you guys have loaned me all that you can, but she's just going to keep alienating me from my son if we don't get a lawyer who tells her that she can't do this. And my mom just told me, I wish that we could, but we're not in a position where we can hire a lawyer for you. We're just not there financially. And that's when I said to my mom, well, if I can't see my son, I don't know what the point of being here is. And I got in my car, and at this point my car had been packed from floor to ceiling, and I started driving to my new apartment in Hoboken. Now my mom she was I believe a case manager for the Burlington County Family Support Organization. And she was trained that when people make questionable statements about potentially harming themselves or other people, that you should call 911 and have a crisis intervention counselor or social worker or somebody come out and intervene. And so my mom thought, well, what did Brian mean by that? I don't really know what he meant by that. And there had been a lot of problems with another member of my family who had been suicidal, and so she thought, I better just play it safe. And she called 911 and immediately realized, I'm not the person who had all the suicidal problems, and hung up the phone. And the police responded to an abandoned 911 call. And the first question they asked of my mom was, does he own firearms? It wasn't, do you think he's going to be okay? Tell us exactly what's going on. It was pretty much, does he own firearms? And when she said yes, they asked, does he have them on him? And she said, I don't know. So about 30 minutes after I leave my parents' house, I get a phone call from my mom, only it's not my mom on the phone. It's an officer, Michael Joy, of the Mount Laurel Police Department. And he's telling me that there's been an abandoned 911 call, and that they would like me to come back to check me for bruises, because anytime they get an abandoned domestic call, they're worried that there's been domestic assault. And I remember sitting in the car, I just turned off the radio, Modest Mouse was playing, and I remember thinking to myself, that's just the craziest thing I've ever been told. It's the most disingenuous thing I've ever heard. My mom is all of 95 pounds soaking wet, and the kindest, most gentle, warm-hearted person I've ever known in my entire life. The idea that the police officers really want me to come back so they can check me for bruises just doesn't hold water. And I asked him if I was legally required to come back, and he said no. And I said, okay, well, thanks for calling. I'm fine. Things are going to be okay. I'm fine. I'm not going to come back if I don't have to. And he said, okay. And I could tell he was disappointed. And we got off the phone. A minute later, he called back and said, well, immediately I could tell his tone was different. But he said a general alert had been issued statewide, and that all of the police officers in the state of New Jersey would be on the lookout for me and the make and model of my car with my Colorado license plates. And that if I didn't come back, then they were going to bring me back. And there was either an easy way or a hard way to do this. And that pretty much set the tone for the next year and a half. An easy way or the hard way, we don't really care what the laws are kind of mentality. And so I decided, rather than risk an O.J. Simpson-style manhunt, I would go back to my parents' house. And I was really reluctant, but I didn't want to be the subject of a manhunt, so I turned around. And later I would learn this was a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights to be free of illegal and unwarranted search and seizures. But they brought me back, and they held me there for 3 hours and questioned me without any probable cause. They claimed it was for my well-being, but there was never a crisis intervention counselor. There wasn't an ambulance. There wasn't a social worker. There wasn't even a phone call to anybody. The very first question when I got back from Michael Joy was, "Where are your guns?" And we spent the next 3 hours talking about firearms. I tried to educate them about what New Jersey's firearms laws were, because I had just talked to the New Jersey State Police and I knew, but these weren't state police officers. These were local police officers who had no idea what the laws were. And ever since this has happened to me, people have told me that I violated the law and that ignorance of the law is no excuse. And I have to show them the laws and explain to them, no, I didn't violate the laws. The police officers who arrested me were ignorant of the laws. Apparently, it's an excuse when you're a police officer, but not when you're a law-abiding citizen. Ultimately, after not even having my Miranda rights read until 3 hours later when they brought me back to the police department, I was arrested and booked on illegal possession of unregistered firearms, a law that doesn't even exist in New Jersey. There's no law that you have to register your firearms. And after I explained that to the police officers, they amended that to illegal possession of firearms, illegal possession of high-capacity magazines, which are standard capacity magazines that come in the box from Smith & Wesson, and illegal possession of hollow point ammunition, which the Trentonian later called cop killer bullets in an article about me. I went through about 18 months of pretrial motions and hearings and eventually trial. And I never had any intention of taking a plea deal, and I was offered many of them, about a dozen of them. And after I was indicted and I'd won custody of my son and things looked like they were going my way, I got a notice in the mail, and it was called a emergent order to show cause. And I only had about 3 days to put together a response and show up in court because they wanted to take all of my custody away from my son. And I hadn't even gone to trial yet. A single witness hadn't testified. And I went before that judge and I explained to him, yes, I was arrested and I was charged with these crimes. They are nonviolent and victimless offenses, and I'm very confident that I'll be acquitted, and I have every intention of taking this to trial and being acquitted. And he said in so many words that he didn't care, and that I had firearms and they're illegal in New Jersey, and he expressed a lot of concern about me being a gun owner. And I said, well, if you're concerned about me having guns, you shouldn't be, because the Mount Laurel Police Department has all of my guns, so I don't even have them. And he said, well, I'm not convinced that if you wanted to have firearms, you wouldn't be able to get them. So he effectively took all of my custody away from my son. He placed limitations on me that are so onerous and burdensome that in the past 5 years, I've been unable to meet those criteria, which are weekday 9 to 5, in a courtroom. I have to reserve a room inside of the courtroom, and there has to be an armed police officer there to supervise me for 1 hour. And in the past 5 years, none of those criteria have been met. If a police officer is available, a courtroom isn't. If a courtroom is available and a police officer is available, it's on a weekend, not a weekday. It's just been impossible. And I think it was structured that way intentionally. I don't think that's an accident. I was definitely the conservative boy in the room, and they didn't like that, and that translated into the other courtroom as well, where in a pretrial motion, my judge, Judge Morley, who is no longer a judge and has been removed by Governor Christie, said to me that guns are illegal in the state of New Jersey. What I did was illegal, that he knew I was guilty and that I was going to go to jail, so that I should take a plea deal. And so they offered me 5 years with a 1-year mandatory minimum. And Judge Morley told me I was a young kid. It's only 1 year in prison. You're bounced right back. It's not that big of a deal. And I remember sitting there thinking, that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. And there's no way you would tell your son to take this deal. There's just no way you would. And I decided to fight it. And I knew that I wasn't able to see my son, and I wasn't able to raise him and show him what it's like to be a man and to be a man of integrity and to have honor and morals and principle, so that I had to teach him from afar. And if that meant fighting this, and this was the only way that I could show him what it means to be a good person of high morals and good character, then that's what I had to do. So I turned down the plea deal, and the lawyer that I had filed a motion to be relieved of counsel. So what he effectively decided was that I was being too difficult by not taking a plea deal. So he no longer wanted to represent me. And I said to the judge, I'm very happy with my representation so far. I don't want to get rid of him. Things are fine. I need a lawyer. I don't have any money to hire another lawyer. I really want this to work out. I have no problems with him. But he won, and he was allowed to keep all of the money that I paid him to represent me up until trial. And I was left fighting a custody war without a lawyer, and now fighting the great state of New Jersey without any representation. Out of desperation, I found an organization called the Foundation for Economic Education, and they exposed me to the ideas of free markets and free societies. And when I was there, I met somebody who told me, you have to be on this show called Freedom Watch with Judge Napolitano. Like, you really need to be on his show. Like, somebody out there would be able to help you. And I remember being incredibly reluctant because I had just started a company, and I didn't want prospective clients to know that I was subject to an indictment. I didn't want employees or anybody else to know about it. It's not the kind of thing that you want to go public about and brag about. And in the past 5 years, over 100 people have reached out to me to let me know they're going through the same thing that I went through, but they're afraid to go public too. In fact, the only person who has had the guts to actually really go public, in addition to myself, is Shanine Allen. And I think history shows if you have the guts to go public and really fight this, the state will back down because they know they're in the wrong. It takes a lot. It takes a lot, and you have to be willing to put everything on the line. But the state will back down if enough people put pressure on them. Eventually, the judge offered me to sign a plea cutoff form, and he said, "Listen, Fox News is trying to use you. Judge Napolitano is not the judge in your case. I'm the judge in your case, and as far as I'm concerned, you're guilty and you're going to go to jail." And by that point in time, I had gotten in touch with Evan Knappen, who's a lawyer in New Jersey, and he'd written at that time, I think, 3 or 4 books on New Jersey gun laws. I think he just came out with his 5th, and the NRA stepped in and took care of my legal expenses to make sure that I could have Evan. And that was huge at that point in time. Because I remember not having anything. I had to scrape together the retainer to give to Richard, who is one of Evan's attorneys. And at the next hearing, he came up to me and handed me a check. And I was like, "What's this?" And he told me, "The NRA is taking care of it. Don't worry about it anymore. Just worry about your son." And that was huge. But they handed me and Richard this plea cutoff form, letting me know that this was the last deal we're going to give you, and it's never going to get this good again. After this, if you sign this piece of paper and you don't take the deal, we are pursuing a conviction to the fullest extent of the law. And I remember I wanted to sign it right then and there and say, I'm not interested in any deals. And the judge actually stepped in and said, whoa, you don't have to make a decision now. We're going to give you 2 weeks to think about it. All you have to do is call your lawyer. You don't even have to come back in. Just tell him that you're willing to take the deal, and all you have to do is come in and report for sentencing and just go to prison. It's like, well, that doesn't sound great. I'm just going to sign a piece of paper now. I have no interest in doing that. And so I signed the plea cutoff form then and there saying I'm not taking a deal. And after I signed that plea cutoff form, they came back and made at least 5 more offers. And that showed me that they were really interested in not taking this case to trial. And that's when I really knew I had a strong constitutional case. And so I took my case before a jury, and this was it must have been, the end of May and the beginning of June of 2010. And we spent the entire few days talking about the laws in New Jersey, especially these exemptions in New Jersey, because gun possession is illegal in the state of New Jersey unless you meet a number of these exemptions. So you have to have a concealed carry permit to carry it on your person or concealed in your car. You have to have a permit to purchase if you intend on purchasing a firearm. And of course, there's a laundry list of exemptions on how you can carry them from one place to another, including from the place of purchase to your residence, from your residence to go hunting, from your residence to go to a shooting range, and from one house to another. And so effectively, guns are illegal. And they arrested me, and they said, guns are illegal possession of firearms. Now you say that you meet one of these exemptions, prove it. So in New Jersey, you're guilty until proven innocent. And we talked about the moving exemptions throughout the entire trial. In fact, even the police officer said that his reason for requesting such a high bail amount is that I had only lived in New Jersey for 3 days and I was moving. But when the judge decided to charge the jury, he told them they were only allowed to consider whether or not I possessed firearms. And that he decided as a matter of law that none of the exemptions, even the moving exemptions, applied. So even though if you look at the police report, my arrest report, and you look at the statute for how you're supposed to transport firearms, it's practically a copy and paste job. I did it exactly how you're supposed to do it. But he told the jury, you're not allowed to consider any of those exemptions. And the jury came back, to their credit, and they had a question, and they said, please define the exceptions to the law for all 3 charges. That is, it was announced that moving is an exception. We need to be clear of all exceptions, if any, for each charge. And the judge said, I don't know if you guys can't hear me, but I said no. I said, you're not allowed to know what these laws are, and I'm the law. They came back 2 more times requesting the exemptions. Each time they reworded their question to try to get the judge to give them these exemptions. And each time the judge refused. Ultimately, in the second day of deliberations, they came back after the 3rd time of requesting the exemptions, and they found me guilty of all 3 charges. And I was sentenced to 7 years in prison with a minimum mandatory of 3 years. And the sentencing judge, who was not the same judge who oversaw my trial, that judge was kicked off the bench by Governor Christie 2 weeks after my trial ended, 2 weeks too late. And the sentencing judge said that the reason for such a harsh sentence was not because he believed that I was a criminal or that I would ever commit a crime ever again, but because he knew that there was a need to create a strong deterrent from gun owners for committing the same offense. And they needed to send a message. So I was their message. And that's when I decided that if that's the message, if I'm the message, then I'm going to make sure this message doesn't work out for them. And ultimately, I spent 4 months in prison of a 7-year sentence. Many chapters are dedicated to what life is like in prison and what my experience was like. And ultimately, on December 21st, 2010, Governor Christie issued executive clemency and released me from prison 6 years and 8 months early. And it's a shame. I couldn't even vote for the guy if I wanted to, because honestly, after that, he would probably have it. I know there's a lot of people have a lot of questions about Governor Christie, and I don't have any questions about him. If it was Corzine, could you imagine where I'd be? I don't even think Whitman would do it, but Christie did it. And he vetoed that magazine bill, too, when they wanted to reduce the magazines from 15 rounds to 10-round capacity. And everybody put pressure on him. But he stood strong. So the book really goes into a lot of the details about really what I've been through and what's happened. And nothing has really changed. I won in the appellate division, and 2 of the convictions were overturned, but they upheld 1 to make sure that they kept 1 felony on my record. And I petitioned the Supreme Court of the United States, and they refused to hear my case. So there's really nothing more than I can do. I'm a convicted felon. I can't vote. I can't rent an apartment. I can't pass a background check for anything. And this is what happens when you're a law-abiding citizen who owns guns in the state of New Jersey. if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That might be more of a statement, but you said this happened down in Burlington County?
Yes, sir.
Is that the same county that Janine Allen was arrested?
Shanine was in Atlantic County.